Welcome to the SRS Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron J. Babyar, and I'm the Training Director of Support Raising Solutions. Whether you're a new ministry worker or a veteran looking to increase your competence and confidence, Support Raising Solutions seeks to bless you in your quest to be a spiritually healthy, vision-driven, fully funded Great Commission worker.
My guest once again today is Vicki McEachern. This is part 2 in a podcast series we're doing briefly just on newsletters, on vision-driven communication. And we spent some time last week talking about why. Please don't listen to this episode if you haven't listened to last week's episode, because the why is so important. In fact, it's more important in a lot of ways than the what and the how. But we are going to be getting into a little bit more of the what and the how. And even though, Vicki, I know you're fantastic, and I'm glad you're on here today, you and I didn't just come across this information overnight. We both had some training in it, right?
You betcha. Yeah, lots of training.
Yeah, lots of training. And so if this is the only training, quote unquote, you're sort of getting on newsletters, we just want to say it's not enough. Please don't use this by itself. It's a great little podcast, I believe, that we're going to have today. But the reality is learning about how to raise and live off support. It's not a very good idea to just try and read a book on it or just listen to a podcast. Please make sure you get some excellent training and coaching. Obviously, we suggest you go through an SRS boot camp at some point. We think it's a world-class training event. There are other training things out there. We're not trying to discount all those, but I guess this is a big disclaimer right from the outset that we don't want people to try and just listen to a podcast and run forward, but to seek additional training. So with that being said, Vicki, we're going to get into a little bit about the newsletter, just the how and the what and all that stuff. But before we do, let us get to know you a little bit better first. So we know you work with CO based off the last podcast, but tell us a little bit about yourself and your family and where you grew up. Let us get to know you a little bit.
Great. Well, okay then. I'm very happily from Calgary, Alberta, which is in Western Canada. It's beautiful. We're right on the Rocky Mountains. We're known for rodeos and things like that. So a lot of the Western prairie spirit. And I moved to Ottawa, Ontario, which is in Central Canada, our nation's capital, to work for CCO starting just over 6 years ago.
Okay.
And I'm the director of communications now, and most people are kind of surprised to hear that my background is actually in a much more technical field. My degree is in computer science.
Really?
So, yeah, you bet. So to anybody who's listening to this and thinking, oh, well, that's nice for her. She's a communications expert. Like, I started from a degree where I was writing in code, not in English. So fear not, anybody can learn these skills. And I'm really happy to help you kind of figure out how to put your words together.
You know, I have some friends that speak Mandarin. It's their native language. And I'm not sure if I would rather try and learn native Mandarin or computer code. To me, they both seem so foreign. I think I would really struggle with that. So I realize one's an actual language, one's just a computer language. But my level of respect for you, Vicki, just went up. That's pretty impressive, I have to say.
Well, there you go. Thank you so much.
Tell us just a little bit more about you as far as personal life. So you moved, you live in a different part of the country, and hobbies. Like what are some of the things you enjoy doing?
Okay, so I love cycling. I have a road bike, and I like getting out there in the summers, especially in Ottawa here on the country roads. That's always a really, really happy place for me. I also love downhill skiing, which is kind of unfortunate moving from the Rockies to Central Canada, where there's not much in the way of serious mountains, but that's okay. That's fine. That's fine. And so, yeah, in Canada here, we have such things, but I do have the Ottawa Canal right out about a block away from me. And there's just nothing more Canadian than putting on a pair of skates and ripping up and down the canal in the winter and getting hot chocolate on the ice and everything.
So cool.
It's pretty special.
Okay, and because you're not our first or probably last Canadian guest, I just have to ask the question.
Yes.
Which hockey team do you support?
The Calgary Flames. It's my home team.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate you getting into that a little bit. I didn't realize that you were into cycling also. That's something that my family has enjoyed over the years. So very cool. But let's talk some time about RAGBRAI, where you ride your bike across the state of Iowa over a week. I've done that before.
Okay.
So I'm going to have to challenge you to do that sometime. But anyway, let's get into this whole newsletter thing. So, listeners, we're going to give you some technical things here, or Vicki will. I'm more listening and talking, but I do want to warn our listeners too. Again, please get training in this. Don't just listen to a podcast. This is helpful, but it's not the final say, and we're not going to cover as much as what we do at the SRS boot camp. So, Vicki, okay, we talked about the why, I believe, very well on the last podcast. Now let's get into the what. What is it people are supposed to be doing?
Yeah, this is the question that I often ask our people. So we have over 100 staff members across the country, and when I talk to them about their newsletters, that's a big thing, right? Is okay, what are you trying to do? What's your goal? What are you trying to make? And people have these really specific ideas of what a newsletter is supposed to look like, and I don't know where they came from.
Okay.
I just don't know, right? And I say that in that a lot of them have these expectations that it's supposed to have, like 10 photos and 4 different stories and those sorts of things.
Basically the Christmas family newsletter every single month, right?
Oh my goodness. And I say, well, of course you have that look on your face coming to me saying, like, how do I do this? Because that would be extraordinary. That's a lot of work.
Yes.
And so in all of it, I say, okay, here's the deal. We are going to simplify this so much. And I see this well of relief come over their face. And I say, yes, here we go. I mean, what is it supposed to be? It's supposed to be a glimpse of your ministry, an important glimpse, a detailed glimpse, a well-written glimpse, but just a glimpse. If you look at the last month of your ministry, if you're doing them every month, if you look at the last month of ministry, it is impossible to fit all of that into a decent email that people are actually going to read, or into a letter that you're going to be able to produce. So don't try, right? Don't try. But also, if you just skim over all those things, then it's not going to be interesting for people, right? If you try and cram it all in, they're going to be able to tell. So what I always tell people is, you want to choose one story from your ministry and tell it well. Just choose one. You have a great photo, couple hundred words that are meaningfully written, and a couple prayer requests at the end, sort of thing. You hit all the things you have to hit for your ministry. Of course, if your organization really needs you to communicate to your people something important, include that. But when it comes to your ministry and what do you need to tell supporters, I mean, it's pretty, for us at least at CCO, it's pretty open. So I say, choose one story, keep it really interesting, and tell it well.
Okay. And so even that right there, for some people, they're like, wait a minute, just one? Really? Just one? What? Don't I have to have full disclosure, or people aren't going to actually think I'm working? Like, don't I have to tell everything all the time?
Yeah, exactly. And I always remind people, this is not an annual report. At least my understanding is it should not be an annual report. It's not even a monthly report, right? You're not clocking your time with your supporters. And when I write our annual publication, I spend a lot of time because I'm trying to cover everything, right? And choose, but even then I have to choose the highlights. So it's figuring out, what do your supporters actually expect from you, right? Do they expect an annual report? Well, no. They just want to hear how it's going and how you're doing. I always use the analogy like this, right? Is if you bumped into one of your donors at the grocery store or in your hometown or at church on Sunday, somewhere where it was kind of like, okay, you're seeing them, but it's not a planned visit. You only have a couple minutes. And they say, hey, how's your ministry going? What would you tell them? You wouldn't trap them in the produce aisle for 25 minutes and say, well, here, let me pull out my phone and show you all these photos. And they're like, okay, well, I got to go make dinner. No, you would say, you know what? Last week, I had this really incredible experience of a student understanding forgiveness for the first time. Let me tell you about them really quickly.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And you would tell them in 2 minutes, right?
You could go 20, but they're probably only going to give you 2, so you better self-edit, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right? Yeah. And so it's all about that. It's sort of thinking, okay, if you bumped into someone, they're not going to expect you to give you the full rundown of like, well, I started my morning with prayer and then I went on campus and then I got coffee. No, it's not a play by play. It's like, here's the most interesting thing that I think best demonstrates all the different pieces of my ministry, and they can leave really encouraged and they have something to pray for, and that's it. It puts some color into the picture.
So with
of your
that
ministry.
idea in mind, that really combats something that I had in my head at least years ago. I need to save up and I need to have lots of stories. And no, I only have one story I can think of this month. Maybe I should just wait till next month to send my newsletter, because I need to have at least 2, 3, 4, 5 stories before I send it. Otherwise, it's just not worth it. And I was really overlooking some things, wasn't I?
Right.
It's important now and then that we mention that we have a resource available to those who help train and coach others that are raising support. The SRS network really isn't for everyone, but it is for those who are seeking to shape direction, build infrastructure, elevate training, and multiply coaching in their ministry culture. We can provide individual or organizational access to other support-raising resources in order to help you help others who are within your ministry. Learn more at supportraisingsolutions.org/network.
I had a big shift in mindset in my second or third year as the director, and I found out that a lot of missionaries were struggling just like you did, Aaron. And I found out that some of them were spending literally days writing their updates. And so I'm not saying like you write one day, you edit the next, you send the third. They were spending full days on it. And I think, oh man, that's time away from campus, away from students, away from doing other things. Like, we can tighten that up a lot. And then the other part is I found out that writing their updates was the thing that missionaries dreaded, right? And I think and I think it sounds the same for you, as you're like, oh man, like I really don't want to do this. It's going to be painful. It's going to be hard. And at the end of the day, I'm not even going to be that happy with what I send out or sure that it's right. So you're like, what's the point in all of it? You felt ineffective and kind of uninspired. And so with me, as you're looking to that, it's, okay, we can make this so much better. And so with all the stories that you're coming up with and things like that, it's like, what would your supporters say if they knew that was your experience? For me, I'd say, oh man, like I love a story. I love hearing from you. I love just one quick story. Like, I don't expect you to send me this huge epistle, right? Like, I don't expect that. And actually, like, I would rather you spend your time doing the other things and like focusing on that event for students or getting in with the local people, right? It's like, I'd much rather you spend your time that way. I love hearing a quick update from you.
Yeah, so true. And I think there's something else in there too that people often, they won't say, but it's true. They're not going to take the time to read all that. I mean, they don't want to be rude, but they're never going to sit you down and say, you realize I only spend about 8 to maybe 11 seconds looking at your newsletter before I decide if I'm going to keep going, and I usually don't. They're not going to say that to you. And so,
I mean, once in a while they do, but it's pretty
rare. And in fact, I was celebrating, I recently sent out, at the time we're recording this at least, so we recently sent out our end of year newsletter, which it's the only time during the year where I will mention finances in newsletters is at the end of year. Otherwise, I just don't talk about it because I don't think that's the point of newsletters. And I was super excited because we had I don't remember the number off the top of my head now, but it was a near 40% open rate. And I was like, oh, we're way above average.
Yes. Yeah.
The reality is, a lot of people don't read it or they don't see it, or if they do open it, they still, depending on who you're talking to, they don't give you 30 seconds. They actually give you more like 8 to 11 seconds before they move on. And so why would you want to spend 3 or 4 days of your time writing something that someone's only going to look at for 8 seconds? That's just there's an economic equation there that with time and money and effort and energy and all that stuff, we have to go, I might need to rethink how I'm doing this.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think my computer science background creeps up quite a bit in this. I'm extremely analytical. And so when people talk about like, oh, but donors appreciate so much when we send these like huge updates. And I say, show me the data, right? Lovingly, gently. Show me the data, right? Is that, yeah, that's a huge investment of time. And if you were going to spend your time anywhere else for that length of time, I would say, okay, let's make sure that we're like really stewarding this carefully, right?
Yeah.
Let's make sure it's worth it. Because if it is, great. We want to spend the time where it's worth it. But one thing I suggest to people is, okay, look at those open rates and look at your click-through rates, right? Is you can kind of tell who's just opening and then closing and then putting a click in. And you don't have to do it all the time. It's just once or twice saying like, okay, are people actually reading and clicking through? And the other thing is, like what do you know for sure about how you're best connecting with your donors? So for me, I don't really know sometimes if my updates are hitting the mark and things like that. But I do know that if I text a bunch of supporters in an hour and I hear just quickly what's going on with me and with them with 20 different people in an hour,
right?
Man, that's something that they mention later. And so with all of it, even with our publication, which I'm talking about all the time, I know because it just went out, but this was a big learning lesson for me. I spent all this time
you're referring to the
year.
big article that you wrote on behalf of the whole organization. Okay.
Yeah, that goes out to supporters. Yes, thank you for clarifying. And I heard year after year, the consistent feedback was, oh, I loved that graphic spread. Oh, I loved the way that you told this through pictures. I very rarely heard, hey, this article really moved me. Almost never.
That Vicki McEachern is quite the wordsmith. Thank you so much.
For me, I had to kind of like, I had to kind of like get over myself, right? Because you're right, the wordsmith, I was like,
right.
Man, I used so many great words in that article and I really told that story beautifully. And you know what? Those things could all be true. But it doesn't matter if people aren't reading it. And again, lovingly, it's the same thing with your updates. If you know that people are like, I love that photo, I love that caption, and they're not really reading the rest of the update, then focus on what they want. Give the people what they want, keep it short and snappy, and just make it a point of a quick connection with them.
I think there's a warning in here too. You mentioned, people saying, "Oh, my people love it." Do they really? Do they really? Yeah. And not to be mean, but I think you touched on that. But is everybody, or are there a small handful of your larger email base that actually pays attention to it? And are you getting a 10% open rate and 1% of them are reading it? And so I just give that caution because I love ministry leaders, Vicki. I love missionaries and church planters and youth workers. Like those are my people. I feel called to serve them. And yet I believe that sometimes in certain situations, they're a little myopic with wanting to believe that people love reading their newsletters, and they put out these massive things and it's I just kind of like, I don't want to be mean and say, you do realize people aren't reading that. Right? And one of my best friends that does missions work, and he's in Africa a while back, like, oh, people love it. Blah, blah, blah. And I said, no, they don't. I said, I'm on your support team. I've been on it for years. I said, I look at 3 pictures and I scan it. And I love these people to death, but I'm like, I don't spend but barely 30 seconds on you. I don't have time for that. I believe you. I trust you. I pray for you. You communicate with me. You pray for us. I give monthly. Like, that's the basis of our relationships. Do I want a newsletter? Yes. Do I have 5 minutes once a month to read your 5-page thing? I don't, and I won't. And it's not that I don't love you. So I was able to have that really frank discussion with him. But you know what? Most of us don't have people on our support team that think about support raising and that think about newsletters. They're going to be quite that honest with us. And so hopefully, Vicki, you and I are being that loving, honest voice for people, where we go, hey, people do love you and they do want to partner with you, but they probably won't take the time to read every little thing. And so that should really adjust the how and the what as you're putting together a newsletter, right?
Right. And I think you've mentioned a couple of times kind of, are we just doing this out of obedience, right? Is this something that we've been told we have to do or that we want to do, right? That we covered a little bit in the earlier episode. And for me, there's kind of a flip side to that obedience, because when I tell missionaries, you know what, from start to send, this missionary update cannot take you more than half a day. And the obedience to spend less time and to send a simpler update for a lot of missionaries is actually more difficult. And there's an obedience in saying, you know what, like some missionaries say, I really want to send out this update that looks like an Instagram influencer and is just beautiful and graphically and all that. And you're telling me I can't. And I said, yeah, absolutely. And so for them to simplify things and to recognize that, yeah, I would like for it to look like a publication, and I would like for it to have all these things and to spend all this time crafting it. And I can't, because obedience demands that I spend the proper amount of time on it. And then I get back to whatever else I'm working on. That's really important. And so I think the obedience runs both ways. And I think for a lot of people they find that there's a place of humility in saying, I'm really proud of just sending out a simple update because it's what is demanded in terms of stewarding my time. And I'm so happy with that. There's a way to send a simple update that is also beautiful and meaningful. And that sometimes...
I was glad. I was glad once I figured out that I only had to write 1 page a month. That saved me all kinds of time.
Yeah, exactly. And so it can be an adjustment, and even for me to say to people, you know what, so I don't know if you have guidelines, Aaron, is if I said, how much time should you spend on an update? Like, what would you say? Do you have a time?
Man, I don't have guidelines. I would accept some coaching from you on that regard. What do you think?
Awesome. So that's it with a lot of people, and a lot of people who I work with say, well, yeah, like that's nice for you to say, but I don't know how long it's going to take me. Right? It's kind of like that that when you're writing essays in school or whatever, right? It's like, well, I might write it tonight, but if I'm not feeling inspired. And so for me, it's like, this is part of our job, and part of our job that we want to embrace and do well. We do everything so excellently. This should be no exception. And so what would it look like if somebody said, oh, I'm planning an event for our ministry, but if I'm not feeling inspired? No, like there are ways that you can get around that. So for me, I say writing it should take, your first draft can and should be done in 30 minutes. From the moment you sit down to the moment you finish it. Okay. And so a couple of things that can help that, you're like, well, like you said, I need this list of things, blah, blah, blah. And mind mapping helps huge with that. There's a whole process I can send you some links on, but it's, I suggest to people say, okay, in the last week, because a week most of us can remember back to, in the last week, what was the most interesting interaction you had in ministry? Because humans make everything more interesting. So what was the most interesting conversation you had, right? What was the most excited call you took? Those sorts of things. And then you just write for 20 to 25 minutes straight. Okay. And so there you go. That's hard in a distracted world, but you're getting that done.
We can make it easy for you. Turn off your Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Turn off your Wi-Fi and all of a sudden you found 20 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. It's so hard. Turn off those notifications, put your phone on silent, not on vibrate, like on full on silent, like we are going to the next level here, and write that update and force yourself. And if like doing the mind mapping will inspire you, you don't wait for inspiration, you plan it.
Right. By the way, go ahead and mention those, because sometimes we're able to get links in the webs into like show notes, and sometimes that doesn't work out so well. So if you want to go ahead and mention a couple of websites or tools really quickly, I'm sure that there's some hardy listeners out there that are going to grab a pen or look that up and save that right now.
Awesome. So a lot of this comes from a mentor of mine who taught me so much of what I know in writing and editing. Her name is Daphne, and her website is publicationcoach.com.
Okay.
So she's a fellow Canadian, and she has a link on her website right up top that says that you sign up for an e-booklet on mind mapping. That'll give you the biggest help. If there's one thing I recommend, it's that.
Okay.
And sign up for her blog. It's 2 or 3 minutes worth of reading, and it will transform your writing.
Great. I'll go ahead and throw one out too. I think most missionaries now are using MailChimp, and that's fine if you use something different to help you with your newsletter. Unfortunately, Vicki, just last night I got an email from a couple that it was painful to look at. It was like if I would have printed it out, it probably would have, I'm guessing 11 to 12 pages of black and white print, no pictures. It really jumped out at me as something I didn't want to look at. And which I feel bad because they're a wonderful couple. I know them. I've been in their house in a different country. They're fantastic people. They're doing a great work in a hard place. But I have also, I felt bad for them, partially because as wonderful as they are, they've never really sought out any training on raising and living off support. And when I've tried to have a conversation with them about it, they made it clear they were closed to that conversation. So I've never pushed it any further. And again, they're great people, but the reality is I have to wonder to myself, are they cutting off some of their supporters from really connecting with them because of how they're communicating, because of how they're over communicating some things and not communicating well on other things. And so certain tools like what you mentioned, and then using MailChimp or, constant content. There's a lot of different ways of using newsletter services, but to help you with the visual side of how it's received, please listeners, use those if you possibly can. You don't have to have a degree in graphic design, and you don't have to self-publish. There are tools for people that are inept like myself to use. So please use those tools. It increases the likelihood that people will be able to want to see and read your newsletter even briefly. Do you have other tools, Vicki?
There is another one. It's called the Hemingway app.
Okay.
And so this is what I recommend to all writers and it's all about readability. Okay. So it has a grade system on it, which some of people are going to be thinking, oh, well, grade 6 level, I don't want to write like a child. It's not about that. You want that number to be as low as possible, because readability is all about how inviting the text is to your audience.
Okay.
And so you actually don't want your writing to be complicated or long or confusing, because then people aren't going to read it. And so Hemingway, you basically copy your stuff, paste it into the web browser. It's all web-based. Okay. And it will highlight certain sections and say, this is not very readable. This is too complicated. Okay. And here you're using adverbs. Hemingway app will ensure that your writing is as punchy and interesting as possible.
Interesting.
Which is the style that updates should be in.
Okay. Now, is Grammarly, is that something different? Because my daughter I have a 17-year-old daughter who is super gifted at writing. And she got really frustrated with me a couple months ago in a very loving, almost maternal sort of way that threw me off. She took my computer out of my hands and installed Grammarly app into my browser. Okay. And it's always telling me, hey, you spelled that wrong, or yes, you sound like you're in 4th grade, or whatever. It helps me all the time. So is that something you use, or do you know about that one, Grammarly?
Yeah, so Grammarly seems like a great tool, and anything that can get you editing in real time and just helping you out, I think is super helpful. Okay. I think Google in all of their products has recently started making suggestions and stuff too. And so with all of that, I would say use it. And with Hemingway, I used it a lot when I was starting. I used it on everything. And then over time, I started to catch myself using passive voice or using gigantic sentences or things like that. Okay. So this isn't going to be an extra step forever. But I would say, everybody can improve the readability of their text, and your partners will appreciate it.
Okay. And just so people know, HemingwayApp.com is they don't advertise on the podcast. I mean, I doubt they're even going to send me a coffee cup. They'll probably never know I did this. But there's a desktop app available for that as well. So even though it's called Hemingway app, it's not like it's something that'll only work on your smartphone. You can use it on your computer.
Absolutely.
Great. Okay. Well, Vicki, I know that we're kind of running into our timetable here. So as we move towards ending, any other thoughts or pointers you'd like to give people when it comes into the how of actually getting out regular? And by the way, I believe that's monthly, but we'll just say regular vision-driven communication.
I think the regular part is scheduling it in, just like you would schedule in anything else. So this whole idea of like waiting for inspiration or waiting for the inspiration to desire to do your update, for a lot of people, especially when you're getting started, it's just not reliably there. So schedule it in. You say, okay, like I'm going to write my update on Thursday morning at 9 a.m. and it's not going to matter if I feel like doing it or not. So that's a big thing. And you'll see over time that consistency will help you a lot. Also,
agree completely.
I suggest always doing it in the morning. You're just going to be able to tackle it better and have that willpower to get after it. And then the other thing is throughout your days is watch for update opportunities. So for me, this would be, like I said, the idea of like, oh, that was super cool. I want to tell my supporters about it. Just jot it down on a side note so that when you go to write your update, you have that at hand. And the other thing is photos. So it's really hard to write an update and then figure out a photo that kind of matches it. I often go the opposite way. I say, this would be a killer photo right now. I'm gonna take this photo so that I can do the update, right? It's like I waited for some of my updates until our materials were published because I could have told them about them 2 weeks earlier, but then what's the photo, right? I know as soon as they arrive in the office, I can have one of my teammates take a great photo of me with it, or, I write about my new team, but I wait until we've gone for our inaugural donut run, right?
You're just planning ahead. You're not trying to do it all at once. So you have a time where you sit down and do it all, but you're thinking of stuff, you're gathering ideas in advance, throwing it in a folder or in a Google Doc or something like that, so that when you actually sit down to organize it, you're not like, oh no, now I have to invent everything from scratch. But you're kind of gathering as you go, right? Great.
Absolutely. And I would say with what we're talking about, so the photos, I would say the photos actually for me are the trickiest part of updates because you need to have those at hand. If you sit down to write your update and then go take your photo, suddenly your schedule is totally messed up. So for me, it's I only include 1 or maybe 2 photos per update. So maybe you make it 3 because you have a consistent header with your face, your shining happy face right in the middle there. But yeah, 1, maybe 2 real-time photos. Make sure they're good quality and you're good to go, and have those ready and stockpiled before you sit down to write.
Well, we could get into this more and more and more, but I think we're at that point where we've said enough to get at least get people thinking and hopefully planning, and I'll reemphasize the kind of final point we made there is get it on your calendar, plan to work on a regular basis. It's not the same as grass growing, but the people that don't mow their lawn regularly in the summer, you can just tell. You can tell the people that just get around to it eventually versus the people that go, hey, it's Saturday, it's 9 a.m., this is what I do, and they're getting their gas or their oil, whatever they need during the week. So Saturday morning at 9 a.m., they're ready to go. Newsletters that vision-driven communication. It doesn't have to be super hard, but having it exist as a regular thing, it really makes it easier, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Vicki, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure, and I appreciate all the information and ideas and resources that you brought to the podcast. And I appreciate you and the work that you do. So thank you for being a part of the SRS podcast.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Aaron. I hope that some of our audience, some of our listeners can tackle their updates with a little more enthusiasm, and it'll be a part of their ministry they really grow to enjoy.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. We would love to hear your ideas for future content. Please visit supportraisingsolutions.org/feedback to share your thoughts and questions. Also, wherever you download your podcast from, be sure to subscribe for future episodes and come back each week to gain more insight into the process of building and maintaining your personal support team.